Hi there, and welcome to the Hidden Pixels podcast, a show highlighting those gaming stories you might have missed on your first playthrough. I'm your host, Sebastian Azaro. On this episode, we're taking a break from the seriousness of the first two episodes and moving on to something a little more fun, the quirky world of Banjo Kazooie. In the games of this series, you control Banjo the bear and Kazooie the bird, exploring the world and attempting to stop the evil plans of the witch Gruntilda. Along the way, you meet Mumbo Jumbo, a cocky magical shaman who will transform Banjo and Kazooie into unique animals or objects for a limited amount of time. These transformations unlock new abilities or areas in the game and allows the player to progress that much farther. But who really is Mumbo Jumbo? Why is he so confident in his abilities? And why is his head shaped like a skull? Today, we take a look at the story of this self-proclaimed best shaman in all the game. Let's dive in. And now, the award you've all been waiting for, the winner for top student here at the Handsome Shaman Institute. This goes to the best shaman enrolled here, the one who shows potential to be the best shaman there is. And the award goes to Mumbo Jumbo! A short but stunningly handsome man rose from his chair, cheers echoing from all corners of the room. Slowly he made his way up the aisle, taking in all the glory, and finally arriving at the stage. He was indeed very handsome, all swagger and a gleaming smile. 3 witches fainted in the front row when he looked in their direction. This was Mumbo Jumbo. He took the microphone from the host, who was a little confused. Mumbo, we usually don't allow speeches. You usually don't get Mumbo Jumbo on stage. Mumbo quietly smiled, but continued taking the mic from the man. Clearly he didn't understand. Mumbo then turned to address the audience. Mumbo like to thank everyone here who made this possible. Mumbo has to thank Protégé Green Witch. But Mumbo thank person who helped him out the most. Mumbo Jumbo. Mumbo made Mumbo great, now Mumbo is best. Mumbo now share greatness to world through franchised Mumbo Jumbo magic huts. Visit one this fall and have all magical dreams come true. Umanaka! And with that, Mumbo dropped the mic and started to strut off stage. An overwhelming wave of applause crashed the filled theater as a group of attractive witches rushed Mumbo. He flashed that beautiful smile again and started signing anything they put in front of him. He was so preoccupied, he didn't even notice the heavier green witch waiting in the back, Gruntilda, Mumbo's Institute-assigned protégé. She was extremely talented, and the Institute paired her with Mumbo as sort of a dream team. She may not have been the most beautiful witch in the world, but with a little training, she could easily be the most powerful. Gruntilda looked longingly at the crowd around Mumbo. None of them had green skin or a hooked nose or warts as she did. All were perfectly beautiful and shapely, and all of them had Mumbo's attention. Her blood began to boil. So what if she didn't have the looks? She had more magical power than all of them combined. She clenched her fists as she watched Mumbo take 2 of the witches into his souped-up sports car and drive off. She'd show him who he should be focusing on. She'd show him who really was the best in the world. Mumbo was dozing off again in his hut, waiting for his protégé to arrive for their lesson. Plans of the new Mumbo Jumbo Magic Hut franchise were scattered all over the table in front of him. He had big ideas for his first summer after graduation, and he was exhausted from trying to put them in motion. All he had to do was get through this last lesson with Gruntilda, and then he'd be free from all other obligations. Then he could really focus on what mattered. Old Grunty waddled in, out of breath but evidently excited about something or other. She slammed the door, jolting the stunningly handsome shaman awake. He shook the sleep from his eyes as he stood up. Witch is here. Good. Today last lesson, so we summarize what Mumbo has taught this past year. But before they could begin, Grunty held up a wrinkled green hand. Not so fast, my handsome teacher. Today you'll learn from this green creature. Now hold still and don't you fret. Ignoring me will be your last regret. There was a pause in the air, as both silently locked eyes. Until... does Witch mean to do that? The rhyming thing? Was that on purpose? Grunty's stone-cold glare faltered for a second, but she wasn't going to back down now. I've had enough. It's time to take a stand. And this rhyming bit, it's part of my brand. I'm going off on my own, filled with black magic. And it will all begin with a spell so tragic. Mumbo stood there confused as the dark green clouds of magic formed and swirled behind the witch. She looked even more haggard and crone-like than usual. Gruntilda was always intrigued by dark magic, but Mumbo never thought that she'd actually dabble in it. Looks like he was wrong. First of all, I'll make you broken. I'll force your magic into this token. And in an instant, electrical currents flew from the witch's hands towards Mumbo. He screamed as they exploded into his chest. In that moment, he felt something leave him, as though he was drained of everything that made him special. The powers that ran through his veins were gone. He crumpled to the ground, knowing that now he was nothing more than a very, very beautiful person. Grunty cackled, as then she used the electrical currents to form a new item on the table. It was a strange silver skull with unsettling human eyes. It glowed with energy that Mumbo knew used to flow through him. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the skull divided into 2 skulls, and then 4, then 8. It continued to multiply until they were falling off the table. The witch laughed again upon seeing the despair on his face. And then with a snap of her fingers they all disappeared, leaving the table bare of everything save the magic hut plans. Oh, poor Mumbo, let's not fight. Your precious power is still all right. But I'll still have to put you in a bind, so I've made these tokens impossible to find. They're all scattered throughout all space. Oh, you should see the look on your face. And the witch continued to shake in fits of laughter. But I'm not done, don't you fret. My next curse is the best one yet. You think I'm an ugly, unsightly hag? What talking about looks can be such a drag. You see, you'll agree that I'm not such a devil, once I place you down on my level. The electric currents flowed to the shaman on the floor. This time, though, he could feel a physical change occurring. His face. Something was happening to his beautiful face. He couldn't tell exactly what it was, but his head felt so much more heavy and solid. He had a hard time lifting it as he picked himself up off the floor and towards a mirror on the nearby wall. Oh, my Mumbo, it won't be so bad. In fact, I think you'll be pretty glad, because you see, nothing is dull when you have the head of a skull. Mumbo raised his eyes to the mirror and reeled at the horror that stared back at him. No, it couldn't be true. The reflection showed his perfectly sculpted body, but where his face, his beautiful, precious face used to be, a stark, white, bony skull stared back. She had done it. She took away everything he had in life, his power and his looks. He fell backwards into a chair, mind blank from the sudden loss. On the other side of the room, Gruntilda folded her arms, looking satisfied with her work. As for that spell, don't try to reverse. Until I'm dead, you'll live with that curse. She cackled before continuing. Well, now that I've finished with all of my fun, I would say my work here is done. Now that you'd be better off dead, it's time to fill this world with dread. And with that, she disappeared in a cloud of thick smoke, her wicked cackle echoing throughout the room. Mumbo was speechless. He thought he was doing Gruntilda a favor by letting her study under him, but apparently she had thought differently. She had taken everything from him, and now he was an ugly beast of a man. He stared at the plans scattered on the table. No, he would not let her win. Skullface or not, he was the best shaman at the Institute. He was going to move forward with his plans while still making this look work for him. Just like Grunty, he just needed a little rebranding. Mumbo looked up at the newly constructed building and smiled. The fourth installment of his magical huts were now complete in Farm Heights, and he couldn't have been happier as to how they turned out. Instead of wallowing in his misery for the past few years, Mumbo decided to just be Mumbo and move forward with the plan. Embracing his new bony look, he designed the huts to look like giant skulls. He may not have his powers, but maybe he could still help people. Maybe he could still make a difference. And any little bit of help he could provide would be needed now. He hadn't heard a peep from Gruntilda over these past few years, but he did hear some strange rumors. Rumors of a sort of mechanical witch, one who embodied the spirit of a powerful rhyming being. And then there was the tower, a large evil lair magically forming right near Mumbo's hut in Spiral Mountain. It didn't take that much of an imagination to see it had the rough shape of Gruntilda's face. The witch had to be involved, and Mumbo had to stop her. It was the only way he could return to his beautiful, handsome self. Mumbo went inside and sat down. If only he had his full set of powers back, then getting his looks would be a piece of cake. But he had been so busy with the franchise, he hadn't had time to go searching for those lost tokens. He sat pondering over where she possibly could have hid them, and all of the things he'd be able to do if he had them all. Just then, a knock on the wall of the hut awoken Mumbo from his daydream. In front of him stood a strange creature, a bear wearing bright yellow shorts and an empty blue backpack. But it was the object in the bear's hands that grabbed Mumbo's full attention. One of the very tokens he was just thinking about. The bear had found one. This was a game changer. Have you seen a metal witch around, Mr. Mumbo, sir? The polite bear seemed kind of like a yokel with his deep southern drawl, but he definitely looked capable of adventuring. Maybe this was the chance Mumbo had dreamed of, the chance to get revenge. Mumbo couldn't do much magic with just one token, but he could give some powers to this bear. Bear need Mumbo magic. Bring more Mumbo token, and Mumbo gets stronger magic. Start with this token. What's Bear's name? Well, I'm Banjo. I'm looking for my friend, and we got to stop this evil witch named Gruntilda, who's a robot. Well, it's kind of a long story. So the rumors were true, Mumbo thought to himself as he took the token and prepared his spell. Grunty was back, and still spreading evil. This was Mumbo's chance to be beautiful again. Well, and save this random bear's friend, sure. Mumbo smiled with determination as he finished his prep and dimmed the lights. Time to party. Banjo looked a little apprehensive as Mumbo flipped a switch, revealing a disco ball and twinkling laser lights. He started the spell, magic coursing through his whole body as he warped Banjo's form into a whole new entity. The strong bear that was standing in front of him moments ago had been transformed into a tiny mouse, small enough to get into the tightest spaces in the nearby area. Mumbo shrugged. Not his best work, but good enough for the first time in years. Come back to Mumbo to return to bear form once you're done doing mouse things. Mouse Banjo squeaked a thanks and scurried off. He had done it. He did his part to help bring Gruntilda down. He was a step closer to stopping her, and a step closer to returning to his gorgeous natural form. A few weeks later, Mumbo was fixing up his location in Bregal Beach when he heard that same familiar voice. Mr. Mumbo, I just wanted to let you know that I have some good news. I found my friend Kazooie. Mumbo turned around to see Banjo standing before him once again, with a token in his hands. But this time, a bright red bird was poking her head out of the backpack. Before Mumbo could introduce himself, she spoke in a shrill voice.
Come on, Banjo. What are we doing hanging around with Skullface here? We need to stop that metal hag.
Mumbo seethed, but shrugged off the insult. He needed Banjo in order to stop Gruntilda, and he wasn't going to let some insult from a gross bird get in the way. He grabbed the token and rolled his eyes, ready to get back to work again. Over the next few weeks, the three of them kept working together. Banjo and Kazooie continued to explore, finding tokens and hurting Gruntilda's plans along the way. Mumbo would assist wherever he could, performing small transformations whenever necessary. Mumbo was a very big help. Trust me. It was on a stormy night weeks later when an explosion from Grunty's lair awoke Mumbo from his sleep. He gazed out his window at the half-finished tower. Cries and screams were echoing from the crown of the lair, but the shaman couldn't make out what was happening. Hours passed, and the noises grew fainter. Soon the sky lightened as the sun rose, but still no answer as to what occurred the previous night. It wasn't until late in the morning when Banjo and Kazooie arrived at Mumbo's door with both good and bad news. "Well, Mr. Mumbo, we did it! We defeated the Mecha Grunty, and we ensured that she couldn't disrupt the past." The pair stood triumphantly, awaiting some sort of applause or congrats. Mumbo stood a little dumbfounded. "Past? What Banjo mean past?" Banjo and Kazooie gave each other a look before timidly replying. "Well, I thought you knew. I mean, it was you who sent us back. We're from 20 years into the future. That robot Gruntilda traveled back in time to stop us from ever meeting, but we stopped her." The two posed again, but were disappointed to see the lack of excitement on Mumbo's bony face. "So, Gruntilda is still here. That was Future Witch?" He didn't want to believe it, but it explained why his face hadn't changed back. Grunty wasn't dead. "And Mumbo send you here? So Mumbo has power then. Mumbo has power to send you forward. Bear and Bird stand over there. Mumbo need to think about this. Space-time make Mumbo skull hurt." Mumbo took a deep breath and focused on his future self. Waving his hands, he felt the hints of magic still somewhere deep inside him. He focused all he could on Banjo and Kazooie, and with a flash they were suddenly gone. He slumped in his chair, brain racing as to what this meant. The pair had stopped Gruntilda, but he was in a different timeline with a witch of his own. At least now he knew what to do when his version of Mecha Grunty showed up. Now all he had to do was wait. Years passed by, and Mumbo continued to keep an eye out for the bird, the bear, and the witch. He kept himself busy, expanding his franchises to new locales like Bubble Gloop Swamp and Freezy Peak. But he never forgot that Banjo and Kazooie would be the key to defeating his former pupil, the key to getting his beautiful face back. It wasn't long before Mumbo's huts took off. Giving magical advice and using his incredible intellect, he more than made up for the fact that his magic was still limited. He soon had enough money to buy a headquarters of his own, Mumbo's Mountain. Sure, it was infested with termites and had a rather rude giant ape of a neighbor, but it was all Mumbo's. He was going to make it into something amazing. It was during this time that rumors of Gruntilda's return also increased. Her once empty lair now glowed green, and Mumbo could hear cackles on the wind late into the night. While they never caught sight of each other, Mumbo knew that the time was coming. Sure enough, it wasn't long after when Mumbo was awoken by the familiar bird and bear. He wanted to cry for joy at seeing them again. He wanted to jump up and embrace his friends who he hadn't seen in years. He wanted to tell them how much cooler he had become. But then he remembered. This duo didn't know who he was or what had happened. This was a younger, less experienced bird and bear. Mumbo was just about to lose hope when he saw what Banjo was holding. Skull tokens. A whole handful of them. The shaman smiled. Maybe he shouldn't lose hope after all. The trio talked a while, with Banjo explaining how Gruntilda stole his sister Tootie and was going to use some strange machine to steal her beauty. Mumbo couldn't believe it. After all these years, Grunty was still focused on appearances, still jealous of all those at the Institute. What a shallow creature, obsessed with looks. But Mumbo wasn't going to go into all of that for his friends. For all they knew, they had just met him. He smiled and took the tokens from Banjo, telling him he knew exactly what to do. It was just like old times. Banjo and Kazooie would collect the tokens while exploring the various areas of the world. Mumbo would save the day by using his magic to transform them into a more strange form for a limited amount of time. This was when Mumbo was at his most comfortable, not helping the various creatures in the world, but by making real progress at taking Grunty down. He relished every chance to transform the pair into some uniquely perfect form. "It's time, Mumbo. We're confronting Grunty tonight." Mumbo's face, originally beaming from the unexpected visit, now froze in grim restraint. He wanted to join them, but they were clear out of tokens. His powers weren't nearly enough to help face the witch. Again, Mumbo Jumbo was ugly and sidelined. He wished them both luck, and they set off towards her lair on Spiral Mountain. As he settled in, Mumbo couldn't help but fret. It was as though he was back to that fateful night, 20 years prior, when the bird and bear destroyed Mecha Grunty. He sat watching for any sign out of his window, hoping that this attempt at her destruction would go as smoothly. Hours passed and Mumbo started to doze, not being able to keep his eyes open. Weeks of hard work and exhaustion and world-saving overcame him, and he finally gave in. Mumbo! Mumbo Jumbo! Mumbo jolted awake to see the figures of Banjo and Kazooie hovering over him. Mumbo! We did it! We saved Tootie, and Grunty's gone! She's dead! Defeated forever! Mumbo groaned as he sat up, trying to process what they were telling him. Gone? Dead? Mumbo can't believe it. He raced to one of the many mirrors in his hut, but the same skull face stared back at him. He didn't understand. If Grunty was defeated, then he should have changed back. Show Mumbo Witch's body. The bird and bear led Mumbo to Spiral Mountain, where a large boulder now stood half buried in the ground. Here, Mumbo. She fell from her tower and was crushed by this here rock. She can't be more dead than that, right? But Mumbo disagreed. Sure, her body was crushed, but there was something else here. Mumbo closed his eyes and breathed deep, sensing his pupil's spirit. Grunty wasn't gone yet. She was weak, far too weak to pose a threat, but she still existed. Mumbo sighed, walking back with Banjo and Kazooie to their house. She couldn't hurt anyone in this state, so he might as well relax. Go on vacation or play cards or something. Maybe if he ignored it, she would fade out of existence. Maybe he could finally relax, awaiting the day when Grunty succumbed to her injuries and he returned to his handsome, normal self. Waiting. More waiting. Mumbo felt like all he did now was wait for something to happen. 2 months had passed since Gruntilda fell from the tower, and his face remained the same. Every day, Mumbo passed the boulder, crushing her, making sure that her spirit was not getting any stronger. Every day, Mumbo felt that little hint of spirit still hanging on. Other than that, he waited, and waited, and waited. Today was just the same. Mumbo strolled down the path towards the boulder, not expecting anything different until... What was that? Mumbo dove behind a bush just in time as one of Gruntilda's hulking monstrosities of a henchman turned the corner. This was Klungo, as big as he was dumb. Mumbo had seen him trying to push the boulder off of Gruntilda before, but to no avail. But what was he doing this time? Mumbo peeked out of the bush to see Klungo dragging a large object over to the boulder. As soon as it was in view, the shaman's jawbone dropped. He couldn't believe his eyes. Mecha Grunty. This was it. This was the beginning of the events that transpired 20 years ago. As Klungo positioned the robot witch near the boulder, the earth shook a little. A faint ghostly form rose out of the rock and dashed straight into the robot. The metallic arms began to move, and soon a cackle could be heard loud and clear. With the Mecha Grunty Klungo made, Banjo's favor will be repaid. I'll steal Kazooie, and in a blast, I'll use my suit to change the past. And with those words, the robot witch blasted off towards Banjo's home. Mumbo knew what was happening. Maybe he could stop it all right here, right now. He had to warn the bird and bear. He tore down the path, barely gaining on the witch. He pressed forward with everything he had, rounded the mountain, and arrived at Banjo's just in time. Banjo need get Kazooie quick. Grunty back, looking to kidnap favorite friend of Baz for evil plan to change history. But high above them, a mechanical cackle could be heard. Too late. Here Hag comes. The witch swooped down with all her robotic glory, grabbing Kazooie and flying away. They were too late. Banjo stared up in disbelief. We can't let her get away with this. Mumbo agreed. He knew what he had to do. He had already done it once. He had it within his perfectly sculpted body. He could do it again. Mumbo used strong magic. Send Banjo back to same time as Grunty. Banjo tried to find a handsome young witch doctor. He helped Bear get Bird back. Mumbo gathered every trace, every ounce of magic that remained in him. He knew it was there. He had already completed this. And with it, he closed his eyes and waved his arms. He focused as hard as he could on that day, 20 years ago, when he first heard of Mecha Grunty. Another familiar light flashed, and suddenly Banjo was gone. He had done it. He sent Banjo back to defeat Mecha Grunty and save Kazooie. And then, he'd be handsome once again. More sitting and waiting. Mumbo knew what was going to happen. He had already lived it. At least, he thought he had. Will this timeline go the same as what he had experienced 20 years ago? Could it go any different? Luckily, the thought of a split in the space-time continuum didn't have too long to marinate, as a bright flash blinded the shaman. When he could finally see again, there stood the bird and bear, as confident as ever that they had defeated the witch's spirit. Mumbo jumped up. He knew he shouldn't get his hopes up again, but after waiting for this moment for 20 years, he just had to know. He ran to the boulder and paused, trying not to get upset that his head was just as bony and skull-like as always. As soon as he got close, though, he knew. The whisper of evil lurking in the corpse below the rock was still present. Grunty's spirit survived, and Mumbo slunk home, trying to decide what to do next. It was time. It was finally time. Sweat beaded on Mumbo's skull. He knew he had to make a move, and now was as good a time as any. Mumbo all in, he declared as he pushed his chips to the center of the table. Kazooie squawked in disbelief.
You sure you want to do that, Skull Brains?
Mumbo never more sure of anything. While a storm raged outside, the heroes were unwinding with a round of cards. It was nearly 2 years after the time-traveling adventure, and nothing really had changed. The boulder was still there, pinning down the last remaining parts of Gruntilda. Mumbo's head was still a skull, and he had given up almost all hope of changing it back. They had crushed Grunty's body and defeated Mecha Grunty, but still the curse remained. Mumbo wasn't sure what he could possibly do to fix it, and he was coming around to the fact that he will probably be stuck like this forever. That was okay, though. He was still the most intellectually gifted creature around, and plus he had his rocking bod. He looked up from his cards and smiled, winning another hand. Mumbo play well, has much of Bear's cash. He chuckled to himself, imagining the new disco light system he was going to buy with all of his winnings, when Kazooie narrowed her eyes and squawked,
Hey, isn't that Gruntilda the witch?
Mumbo jumped out of his chair, but he couldn't see anything out of the darkened window. He gave the bird a puzzled look, but she shrugged.
Oh, must have been the shadows.
She was counting what seemed to be a larger pile of cash than before. But before Mumbo could say anything, the entire house started to shake. It was like an earthquake was splitting the home in two, knocking pictures off the wall and Mumbo onto the floor. Whether it lasted a minute or an hour, the shaman couldn't tell. All he knew was that there was trouble brewing. The group all looked at each other nervously before Banjo suggested that someone should go and check out the source of the shaking. There was a pause before Mumbo spoke up. Mumbo much brave. Me go look outside. Back in minute. And with that, he ran out the door in a full sprint. He knew exactly where to go, where the source of the mischief was located. He just hoped he could get there in time. He heard the voices before he even rounded the corner. Craggly and scratchy, Mumbo hid behind a tree to scope out what had caused the disturbance. In the gloom, he could barely discern the shocking sight. In the distance was a huge robot drill protruding out of the ground. But closer were 4 figures. One was the familiar Klungo, big and opie. The next 2 were green in complexion, one tall and thin as a rail, while the other fat and similar in size to the boulder. But it was the 4th and final figure that had Mumbo's attention. Gruntilda the witch. Alive. She may have looked a little more worse for wear than Mumbo remembered, but that cackle was undeniable. After these 2 long years, Grunty was back. Mumbo had to warn Banjo and Kazooie. He took off towards their house, knowing that the sinister group must have spotted him. Luckily, he had a perfect running form. Dodging spells, he galloped towards the house. But when he got inside, he was out of breath, gasping his message to the group. "Everyone must run quick. Grunty is coming." The others laughed him off, thinking he was pulling the same trick as Kazooie did earlier. Banjo tried to prove him wrong by opening the curtain, but he stopped in his tracks when he looked outside. "He's not joking, everyone! Quick, run!" The whole group started charging out of the house, all except this one old mole named Bottles. Convinced that they were still playing a joke on him, he stayed in his chair. "No way I'm falling for that one again." Boom! The others had escaped just in time, but the poor house and old Bottles the mole inside were blown to smithereens. Mumbo, thrown from the house by the blast, knew in that moment that this cycle will never end. That Gruntilda the witch would never truly be gone. That Banjo Kazooie would always ask to use his amazing magical abilities to defeat her. As he picked himself up off the ground, he raised his hands to his face, and he felt the cold bone that he had known for so long. He couldn't even remember what it felt like to be his normal, beautiful self anymore. Back when he was the greatest shaman at the Handsome Shaman Institute. Back when he drove a kick-ass sports car and got all the chicks. Mumbo shook his head. You know what? This was the last time. He needed to avenge Bottles, but after that he was done with magic. This cycle was just too much. The training, the exertion, the transforming, the false sense of security in defeating Grunty just to have her return in another hideous form. It was exhausting. No. Mumbo was going to retire. He was going to sell the franchise, buy a whole fleet of kick-ass sports cars, and become a mechanic. Maybe then he'd find some peace. Just one more adventure, and then he'd finally hang them up for good. Some of my earliest gaming memories come from sitting in my friend's partially finished basement playing one Nintendo 64 classic after another, collecting coins in Super Mario 64, playing songs in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or battling in counter-operative mode in Perfect Dark. All of these have shaped my gaming tastes in one way or another. Banjo Kazooie and its sequel, Banjo Tooie, were both heavily involved in the 64-bit rotation. In my opinion, these were the perfection of the Super Mario 64 design, the first games that made collecting little trinkets challenging yet attainable and enjoyable. It was a world that felt quirky and weird, but in an overtly friendly and funny way. It was everything my 10-year-old brain wanted in a game. Looking at the current gaming landscape, I really hope there's a space for quirky adventures such as this. While other games such as Yooka-Laylee have attempted it, they've all come up a little short. Maybe the solution is just looking to the new classics being released by Nintendo. Or maybe it's giving up and acknowledging that gaming has changed, and now Minecraft and Fortnite are king. Either way, I'll always remember those days in that basement, playing for hours on end, and I'll keep looking for games with characters as zany as Mumbo Jumbo. Next week, we're changing courses again. In anticipation of The Division 2 coming out next month, we're headed towards the original game's snow-covered cityscape. Make sure to bring a surgical mask and some hand warmers for that one. We'd also like to announce a giveaway contest that we're running. All you have to do is subscribe, rate, and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and then you'll be entered to win a Banjo Kazooie themed prize pack. It's a grouping of a few different items from the series, made by some seriously talented artists. We're really excited about this promotion, so make sure you get on Apple Podcasts to enter. And check back during the next episode, where we'll announce the winner. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Today's show was written, recorded, and produced by me, Sebastian Azaro. All sources used today could be found in the episode details on our website, hiddenpixelspodcast.com. Episodes are now available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. If you like what you heard, or even if you didn't, please subscribe, rate, and review. And follow us on Facebook at Hidden Pixels Podcast and on Twitter at Hidden Pixels Pod. And of course, thanks for listening.